clubs, our owners fully understand how important it is to our fans that we get the game on the field as soon as possible.
MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred held a press conference yesterday discussing where we're at in the MLB Lockout. Watch here his full video statement. And there's also a second part. If you haven't heard what he said about the lockout when it first began, he's only ever spoken out it publicly once before, and that's the day when the lockout went into effect.
I have to report that effective at 12:01 a.m. this morning, we instituted a lockout of Major League players.
So it's interesting to look back at his words back in December and compare where we are now. Also, subscribe to my channel because I'm bringing the breaking news tomorrow, Saturday, February 12th. There will be another public statement coming from Rob Manfred after a big meeting on the lockout. I'm Jesse with the Improbable Podcast. Let's get right into it.
We want to reach a fair agreement with the Players Association, and we want to do that quickly. We have listened carefully throughout this negotiation, and we have moved towards the players on key areas in an effort to address their concerns. We've proposed an agreement that is better in every respect than the expired contract.
Really? How so?
For the first time in history, and despite substantial opposition by some clubs, we've agreed to institute a draft lottery to address the players' concern about clubs not competing. The players have said throughout the process that a key priority is getting young players paid more. We agree, and we actually share that goal. That's why we've proposed to increase pay to young players through significantly increased minimum salaries and by accepting the concept brought forward by the players of a bonus pool for the game's best young stars. Under our proposal on the table, every single pre-arbitration player would be better off than under the previous agreement.
Then why did it take so long to get this done?
We've agreed to a universal designated hitter and the elimination of draft choice compensation. These changes will improve the free agent market by creating additional jobs that are often filled by veteran players and by reducing, actually eliminating, the drag from compensation. We've made a meaningful proposal directly responsive to the players' long-standing concern about service time of young players. We'd like to expand the playoffs, which is good for players and for clubs. It's also good for our fans, the vast majority of whom enjoy playoff baseball.
It's not good for fans? The lockout.
We think the new format will encourage more clubs to compete while giving more players the opportunity to participate in the postseason. In total, the proposals we've made would move the agreement decidedly in the players' direction. Where the clubs have been and remain unwilling to move is in response to player proposals that we believe will undermine the competitive balance in our game.
You mean to undermine the greed?
For example, the players' insistence that we reduce revenue sharing will without question lead to less competition, not more. Changing the current agreement by taking resources from clubs with relatively limited revenue will make the game less competitive. And when you think about it, it's like asking people to take a pay cut. Lastly, on timing, we're doing everything we can to get a deal done for our fans.
Really? Spring training is in how many days?
We'd hope that a federal mediator could provide some assistance to help the parties work through their differences and break the deadlock. We believe that the involvement of an impartial third party could help bridge some of the gaps and facilitate an agreement. The FMCS is there exactly for these types of labor disputes, and we thought it would be productive given the tightening calendar.
Or maybe you did it as what the players say, a publicity stunt.
While it's unfortunate that it was rejected, we remain committed to offering solutions and will once again offer the Players Association a proposal on Saturday in an effort to move the process forward.
So we're going to be bringing that news for you here Saturday. So guys, remember, subscribe.
The status of spring training is no change right now. We're going to have a conversation with the MLBPA about the calendar. We understand where the calendar is. But until we have that conversation and until we see how this session on Saturday goes, it's no change. We have consistently tried tactics to move the process. We hoped the lockout would do it. We thought the mediation suggestion might help do it. We've reached out and made proposals when there were gaps. In terms of any delay in the process, that's a mutually or a mutual responsibility of the bargaining parties. Phones work two ways.
Wow. Way to take responsibility in your role as Commissioner, Rob.
Do you believe that we will have opening day on March 31st?
I am an optimist, and I believe we will have an agreement in time to play our regular schedule.
You're an optimist, but are you prepared to miss regular season games if it comes to that? And have you sort of given consideration to what both the short and long-term adverse effects that might have on the sport's vitality?
If I hadn't given consideration to what it would mean to miss games, I wouldn't be doing my job. Obviously, I pay attention to that. I see missing games as a disastrous outcome for this industry, and we're committed to making an agreement in an effort to avoid that. It is part of my job to get us to an agreement that keeps the game on the field. I take that responsibility really seriously, and what somebody says on social media really doesn't affect my thinking in that regard. It's my responsibility to do everything we can to make an agreement that the industry can live with and keep the game on the field, and we are trying to do that.
All right, guys. That's it for yesterday's press conference. So part two is other press conference he did, which was in December, which was the only time he's ever spoken publicly about this. So here it is.
I have to report that effective at 12:01 a.m. this morning, we instituted a lockout of Major League players. We took this action with the support of all 30 clubs after we failed to reach a new agreement with the Players Association, despite our very best efforts. We came to Texas to make a deal. We committed to the process, we made proposals, and it just did not happen. After the owners' meeting in Chicago, I made clear the rationale for an off-season lockout. It's the norm in professional sports, and we feel it's the best strategy to protect the 2022 season for the benefit of our fans. We made the mistake of playing without a collective bargaining agreement in 1994, and it cost our fans and our clubs dearly. We will not make that same mistake again. It's important to keep perspective on the lockout issue. The lockout is part of the process that's designed to move the parties towards an agreement. Despite the lockout, we remain ready to bargain whenever the Players Association wants to bargain, and we are steadfast in our desire to get a new agreement. I'm not going to say much on the substance at the table. Suffice it to say that the Players Association, as is their right, made an aggressive set of proposals in May, and they have refused to budge from the core of those proposals. Things like a shortened reserve period, a $100 million reduction in revenue sharing, and salary arbitration for the whole two-year class are bad for the sport, bad for the fans, and bad for competitive balance. I am really proud of the effort that was put forward by our negotiating committee. The committee made creative proposals to address union concerns, including proposals that would materially increase salaries for young players, eliminate draft choice compensation, create a universal DH, and create a draft lottery in baseball for the first time. Let me finish by reiterating our willingness to bargain at any time and our sincere desire to get a new agreement so that we can all enjoy a great and uninterrupted 2022 season.
Rob, how much damage does a lockout do, even if it is only an off-season lockout?
Look, it's not a good thing for the sport. It's not something that we undertake lightly. We understand it's bad for our business. We took it out of a desire to drive the process forward to an agreement now.
How does a lockout move you toward that agreement?
Look, it's part of the theory that underlies the National Labor Relations Act, right? People need pressure sometimes to get to an agreement. Candidly, we didn't feel that sense of pressure from the other side during the course of this week. And, the only tool available to you under the Act is to apply economic leverage. Bob.
Rob, is there any consideration as far as delaying the lockout till a week after winter meetings or later in this month?
Yeah, delaying the lockout once the contract expires gets complicated legally, and frankly, from our perspective, we wanted to move the process now because we want an agreement now for our fans.
Michael?
Rob, you spoke in Chicago that fans will understand the difference between a lockout relatively early in the offseason and one that causes cancellation of games. Do you think they'll still be understanding if, say, the union's resolve does not change and the owner's resolve does not change? And do you think they'll still be
Look,
understanding?
it is my hope and expectation that the parties will get back to the table and get an agreement done.
I know you had said to make the lockout was to preserve, to hopefully preserve the 2022 season.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a drop-dead deadline in which to do that, to make sure the games will not be affected with spring training or games?
Yeah, I just think speculating about drop-dead deadlines at this point, not productive. So I'm not going to do it.
Do you have further meetings planned?
We don't have anything scheduled. I'm sure there will be communication between the parties. And again, it is our desire to get back to the table as quickly as we can.
Rob, what about the union's proposals was bad for the sport, bad for fans, and bad for competitive balance?
Let's take 5-year free agency. I think that we already have teams in smaller markets that struggle to compete. Shortening the period of time that they control players makes it even harder for them to compete. It's also bad for fans in those markets. The most negative reaction we have is when a player leaves via free agency. We don't see that making it available earlier. We don't see that as a positive. Taking $100 million away from teams that are already struggling to put a competitive product on the field, I don't see how that's helpful.
Rob, I think there'd be skepticism that teams are struggling. Can you explain or elaborate on that suggestion that teams are struggling to put competitive players, teams on the field?
Well, look, I've watched this game, as an insider for more than 3 decades. I think that most people who understand the game realize that in our smaller markets, it's a lot harder to win than it is in our bigger markets.
You said, Rob, that you guys made best efforts to make a deal. Mm-hmm. Could you have made more proposals throughout this process? Well,
you could make more proposals. I'll give you one example. We made a proposal yesterday that if it had been accepted, I believe would have provided a pretty clear path to make an agreement.
Bob.
Rob, is there anything accomplished in these 3 days in Texas? Did you learn anything?
Oh, yeah. You look, it's the process, right? You always learn things. You get new ideas. You get a better feeling for people's priorities. So, I don't want to, we didn't get there, but they were not wasted days. It was worthwhile in terms of the process moving forward.
You say you see a clear path somewhere. Do you believe the union sees the same thing? And if so, is there a deal that could come together quickly?
Look, the timing of a deal, you're always one breakthrough away from a deal. That's the reality. I mean, I can't answer it better than that, Jeff. I'm not trying to duck you, but literally, I think a big piece of the process is trying to make proposals, have conversations, make suggestions that could lead to that breakthrough that shows you the way.
How open is the league to allowing players who are rehabbing injuries as well as in constant contact with mental health professionals on the club side to continue that relationship?
Yeah, it's not a question of league willingness. That's a legal issue upon which we do not have flexibility.
Sorry, I do think in the past the NHL has done that. Is that
Look, again, I'm not going there because it involves legal advice that we've been given, and it is, from our perspective, it is a legal issue.
okay?
I guess to continue off of that, are club employees in any danger of furloughs or layoffs because of this?
Yeah, we've had conversations. Certainly, no danger in the central office. We've had conversations with the clubs. There is no expectations at this point in time that there's going to be furloughs of front office employees.
And I would ask the same question of the union too, but are owners, I guess, on your guys' end, prepared to make concessions to players and just going forward to make a deal? And do you think you have made enough? In that regard?
I mean, let me say two things about that. We are willing to continue to commit to the process to get to a fair agreement. If that involves making further concessions, it involves making further concessions. Just as a matter of perspective, we proposed the elimination of draft choice compensation. This industry had a strike over that issue in 1985. That is a major concession that has been the source of friction as to how the free agency system has operated. We have made concessions.
Bob. Yeah, Rob, a lot was made last night about the website, scrubbing photos, taking down stories. Is that a legal issue or?
It is.
Did you guys make a proposal for any on-field changes, and why or why not?
The on-field changes were the topic of discussion at the table. We did make a proposal early on about a joint process with respect to on-field changes. We did not make any specific rule change proposals. We are in the process of still evaluating changes. And frankly, based on the discussions at the table, we saw it as another contentious issue and tried to put it to one side in an effort to get to an agreement on the theory that we could deal with it midterm of the next agreement.
Take two more, Michael and then James.
In your letter, Rob, in describing the lockout as defensive, can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Is it mainly that teams' inability to be competitive, or is it go beyond that?
Defensive in the sense that you want to control the timing of the dispute. It really refers back to the 1994 experience. If you play without an agreement, you're vulnerable to a strike at any point in time. What happened in 1994 is the MLBPA picked August when we were most vulnerable because of the proximity of the large revenue dollars associated with the postseason. We wanted to take that option away and try to force the parties to deal with the issues and get an agreement now, which is what we continue to believe is best for the fans.
I guess, Rob, just bigger picture, I know you use words like frustration and, that the other side was unwavering, they weren't changing. I mean, but why, I guess, do relations between the two sides seem so fraught and tense right now? And what can be done, I guess, to...
Yeah, I don't feel frustrated. I'm disappointed we didn't get to an agreement. That's different than being frustrated. I think we're in a process. I'm prepared to continue that process, and I'm optimistic that we're going to get a deal. Secondly, the whole relationship issue, I think people put way too much emphasis on that issue. At the end of the day, it's about the substance. We're here, they're there, we need to find a way to bridge the gap.
Thanks for watching. Hit that red button, make it bleed blue. throw a fastball at that subscription button, and hit a home run on that notification bell if you want to see more Dodgers content. Bleed blue.